All right, good evening. Daf Yomi for the month continues to be sponsored by Mr. and Mrs. Moshe and Susie Feder, Lili Nishmas, Mrs. Feder's father, Simcha Ari ben Yosef Tzvi, whose yahrzeit was back on the 17th of ER. And we continue on tonight with Bifnei Beis Din V'Shelo Bifnei Beis Din. We had an argument between Rabbi Meir and the Chachamim in the Mishnah. Rabbi Meir and the Chachamim were discussing whether we know that if a person takes his own oath that he doesn't know testimony, so then that oath is effective whether he does so in court or not in court. Bifnei Beis Din v'shelo bifnei Beis Din. Now, what happens if he is adjured? Adjured means that somebody else causes him to take an oath. I guess that's the technical term for it, right? So somebody says, I would like for you to take an oath because you know testimony, and the person says, I swear I don't know testimony, right? But he's being told by others. He's not forced. He's doing it of his own accord. He's swearing, but he's doing so because he was asked to do it by somebody else. Okay, so that we said there was a machlokas. According to from others, if somebody else is telling him to swear, so that oath is only effective if you swear that oath that you don't know testimony in court. But out of court, that perhaps somebody might say that even though he doesn't mean that he doesn't know any testimony. Right? That's what Rabbi Meir says. The Chachamim say it makes no difference, right? So that whether it's going to be your own testimony, whether you're going to take the oath for yourself or from others, regardless, it has to be in Beis Din. Outside of Beis Din, this oath of Shevuos, this oath of Eidos doesn't count. Logic behind that is that the oath of Eidos is going to apply in circumstances where your oath is going to cause some kind of loss of testimony to the person who needs your testimony. So, Eidos is testimony, right? So it's going to cause some kind of oath of testimony. It's going to cause some kind of loss. If you're not even in court yet, so then testimony isn't even a thing. So therefore, if you're going to be swearing outside of the court, so then why should there be any loss that's involved in that? So the question is, b'mai kamiflagi, what is the point of argument between Rabbi Meir and the Chachamim? So Amrua Rabbanan Kami de Rav Papa. So the Chachamim explained it in front of Rav Papa. The issue is bidon mina umina, bidon they're arguing in the old argument of don mina and don mina ve'oki ba'asra, which means that when I learn something from a different source, and I take that item that I learned from the other source and I put it into, it's like a copy and paste. So I'm going to learn something from this area over here. In this case, we're going to talk about Shevuos HaPikadon. Shevuos HaPikadon is an oath that somebody swears that a Pikadon is a security deposit. So if Reuven says to Levi, watch my item, and then Reuven comes to Levi later on and says, can I have my item back? And Levi says, I don't have anything. So he can swear to deny that he owes it. He has to swear to say that he doesn't owe it. So in that circumstance, you don't need to take that oath in court. Right, that oath can apply outside of courts as well as because that's not relevant. The oath is a denial of the owing of money. It doesn't matter whether it's in court or out of court. So we're going to swear. We're going to take this oath of pikadon, which the circumstance of pikadon is when the person takes the oath by himself, meaning I swear I don't have pikadon for you. So that circumstance, how do we know? So basic bottom line is, how do we know that, and when it comes to Shevuos Eidos, when it comes to the testimony, the oath of testimony, the only type of oath that the Torah talks about in that context is the oath when somebody else tells you to take the oath. But one that is adjured by others. That's the art school word, adjured. Adjured by others, right? If somebody else is going to tell you to take that oath, then the oath applies. Well, that's going to apply only in a court circumstance. Everyone is going to agree to that because that is talking about the oath of testimony. The question is, when I'm going to learn about the oath of myself, I'm going to also learn that if I decide on my own to take the oath, that can also be a violation of an oath of testimony. Where do I learn as the source for that? The source for that is the oath of pikadon, the oath of swearing against the security deposit. Since I can take such an oath that way myself and be liable, so too I'm going to extrapolate that over to the case of the Shevuos Eidos and say I'm also liable if I swear for myself as well. Now, the question is, when you learn something from source 1 over to source 2, Do you take all of the rules, you copy and paste all of the rules that were over at source 1 and put them into source 2? Or you copy the main idea of source 1, and then you copy as like they have like the paste function where this says paste with use destination formatting, right? Use source formatting or use destination formatting. That's essentially what the machlokas is don mina is and don mina ve'oki ba'asra is, okay? And that works like this. Rabbi Meir Sava, Rabbi holds, don mina umina mi pikadon. We're learning about the oath where I take the oath myself. The source for that is going to be the pikadon. So I'm going to copy from pikadon, and that's the security deposit. I'm going to take that oath, and I'm going to move it over to the oath of testimony. Now, ma pikadon mushba mipiatz mochayev, af eidos mushba mipiatz mochayev. I'm going to learn that just like when it comes to the oath of security, if I were to take that oath myself without anybody asking me to take that, I just voluntarily take that oath, I am liable for violation of that oath. So too, now if a person takes the oath themselves by an oath of testimony, they also can be liable, even though nobody asked them to take that oath themselves. Great. Now, umina, then we're going to learn, when we paste, we're going to use our source formatting. We're going to use the original format, the way it was learned over at Pikadon. That's the way that it's going to be applied here. Ma Pikadon bein bebeistin bein shlo bebeistin. When it comes to Pikadon, we had learned that by the security deposit, it doesn't matter whether you're in court or whether you're not in court. Only when it came to a testimony, an oath of testimony, did it matter that it was in court. An oath denying that I owe somebody something could be a denial whether it's in court or not in court. So if I'm going to copy the rule that I can take my own oath, which applies in Bikadon, and it applies whether I made that oath in court or not in court, I'm going to take that whole thing and I'm going to move it over here to Shevuos Edus, to the oath of testimony. And I'm going to say that also an oath of testimony, I can make one myself, but the same rules apply in court or out of court, same way. Because I took the entire thing that I learned and I moved it over to here. So therefore, bein bebeistin shelo bebeistin. Af edus, so too, when it comes to an oath of testimony, where's my destination? Where I'm pasting this rule, bein bebeistin or bein shelo bebeistin. It's not going to matter whether I'm taking my own oath in beistin or not. Okay, that's the way Rabbi Meir learns it. V'Rabbanan Savri, Rabbanan say, don minov oki ba'asra. It's going to be pasting using destination formatting. And here's how it works. Ma pikadon mushba bipi atzmo chayiv. Just like when it comes to a pikadon, when it comes to the security deposit, a person can take his own oath without being asked. He can take that own oath on himself and be liable. So that's the copy. And I'm going to paste that over to the rule, af edus, when it comes to the Shevuos Edus, when it comes to the oath of testimony, mipi atzmo chayiv, I'm going to be liable if I take an oath myself. However, I have to take a look at how do the rules operate by oath of testimony. In the oath of testimony, we had learned that when somebody else tells me to swear, it has to be in court in order for me to be liable. So too, despite the fact that in Pikadon's case, the oath was effective in court or out of court, once I paste that rule over here into Shevuos Edus, it's only going to be effective in court, not out of court. The oki ba'asra, so I'm going to use my destination formatting. Ma mushma bipi achirim bebeistin in shelo bebeistin lo. Just like in the case of the Shevuos Edus, the testimony oath, it only applies when somebody else, when the Torah tells me that if somebody else tells me to take that oath, so it only applies in beistin. It doesn't apply outside of beistin. Af mushba bi'atzmo, so too, when we apply the rule from Shevuos Bikadon, from the security oath, to the oath of testimony, and you are going to take this oath on your own, bebeistin in shelo bebeistin lo, it only applies in court, not out of court. Okay, so that's where their argument is, and that's essentially the point of dispute between Rabbi Meir and the Chachamim. Do I need, when I'm taking the oath by myself, does it need to be in court, or can it be even effective when it's outside of court? And it depends on how you learn that. Amar Lahu Rav Papa. So remember, they were telling this in front of Rav Papa. So Rav Papa says, yeah, but that's not correct, right? Rav Papa says, Imi pikadon gamri la rabbanon, de kuliyama lo pligi de don mina amina. He says, if the rabbanon, nobody disagrees this idea that when you take something from its source and you put it into a new destination, you're going to apply all the similar rules. That's for sure the case. So if the source, you think that the argument between Rabbi Meir and the Chachamim is that they agree what the source is. They agree the source is the Shevuos Bikadon. is the oath of securities, and the only question is how much of that rule do you transfer over? That's not the argument. The argument is what the source is. If the source was Shevuos Pikadon, was the security oath, then everyone would agree that it would follow the exact same rules of Shevuos Pikadon, and therefore a Shevuos Eidos, the oath of testimony, would apply both in court and out of court. Ela hainu taimid the Rabbanan. So then what is the reason why the Rabbanan hold that it doesn't apply outside of court? Why? Because they're not learning it from Gzeira Shava, from Shevuos and Pikadon. They're not learning it from the Shevuos. They're learning it from what's called a Kal V'chomer, learning the more strict circumstance from the more lenient circumstance. And they say like this: Ma mipi acherim chayev, mipi atzmo lo kol shekain. If somebody else comes and takes an oath, forces you to take an oath, tells you should swear to that, that's an effective thing? For sure, if you decided on your own to take an oath, that's for sure more effective, right? It seems clear that should be the more significant oath if you decide to do it yourself. So then, for sure, that's the case. Now, so therefore, what we're saying is that when it comes to Shevuos Eidos, when it comes to the oath of testimony, since it's effective if somebody else tells you to take the oath, for sure, we know that it's going to be effective for you to take your own oath. Well, if that's the case, if you're going to learn it from a Kal V'chomer, we have a rule by Kal V'chomer. The rule by Kal V'chomer is Dayo lavo min adin lios kenodun. So the rule is that if I'm going to say just like this, then this, I can't extrapolate greater than that. Here's how that works, okay? The classic case of Kal V'chomer is the case where Miriam speaks Lashon Hara about Moshe. Miriam speaks Lashon Hara about Moshe, and Hashem says, well, how long should we punish Miriam outside the camp? And Hashem says, well, if a person were to speak badly about a human being, right, then it would be you'd be punished, you'd be sent out for 7 days. Kal V'chomer, you speak badly about Hashem. How much more so when you speak badly about Hashem? So how long should she be sent out? Well, you might think if it's for a human being, it's 7 days. For Hashem, it's more than 7 days. The answer is no. When you have a Kal V'chomer, the logical deduction means it's at least 7 days, but you cannot presume it to be more than that either. Therefore, if you say, well, if it's likely, right? Imagine like this: if it's $50 fine for speeding 10 kilometers an hour, then what's the fine if I'm speeding 50 kilometers over? The answer is more than $50, or at least $50, right? That's how that works. But I can't assume that it's going to be $100 or $200. I don't know how much it is. All I know is that it's not less than the other circumstance. So therefore, that's the way this works as well. I don't know all I know is that if I swear by myself, that it's effective, because that's the Kal V'chomer. But I can't know that it's going to be effective in more circumstances. So therefore, just as if somebody else told me to take an oath, it would be only applicable in Beis Din, so too if I swore by myself, it would only be applicable in Beis Din. So ma mushpa m'pi acherim bebeis din im shelo bebeis din lo. If somebody else told me to take the oath, it would be effective in Beis Din, but not outside of Beis Din. Af mushpa m'pi atzmo. So too, if one swore by himself, so then I cannot presume it to be greater than that. Therefore, bifnei Beis Din in shelo bifnei Beis Din lo. Only in front of Beis Din would it be effective and not outside of Beis Din. So therefore, the argument between the Rabbanan and Rabbi Meir is what's the source? And that's the way Rav Papa learns it.
So you have an argument between one Rav Meir,
yes,
and the Chachomim,
yep,
which I understand it as many other rabbis.
Correct.
So what's the argument? Wouldn't
You're asking why is there still an argument? Wouldn't the majority win? The answer is halachically yes. Nevertheless, understanding the source of the argument or the point of contention is always our critical exercise in learning to think through Gemara. Okay. Right? The exercise of learning Gemara is not to come up with the solution.
Right.
It's the process of the mental exercise of understanding the distinction.
Okay.
Right? So that's how the Gemara works. Okay, so now, Amru lo Rabbanan the Rav Papa. So the Rabbanan, so this is where the Rabbanan and Rav Papa have had a disagreement on how to understand the argument between Rabbi Meir and the Chachamim. So the Rabbanan said to Rav Papa, Mi matis amrit delav bedon mina pligi. How can you understand, 1 second, you're telling me that both Rabbi Meir and the Chachamim learn the rule of don mina? That's the rule of copy and paste using source formatting rather than destination formatting, right? We're going to use the original rule. Is that true? I'll show you a circumstance, which is a different circumstance, and they don't seem to hold that way. That's not, we were in the Mishnah, but Gabi Pikodon, Shevuos, Gabi Pikodon. When it comes to the circumstance of a security deposit item, right? Somebody says, Reuven says to Shimon, watch this item for me, and then he comes to get it back, and Shimon says, I swear I don't have it. Okay, so that's the circumstance. Shevuos haPikodon, no heges ba'anoshim b'v'noshim. Later on, we're going to see that this oath of Pikodon, that is a violation. If you violate that oath applies to both men and women. And u'berchokim u'krovim, it applies to relatives and non-relatives. B'ksherim u'bepsulim, it doesn't matter whether you're kosher witnesses or non-kosher witnesses. Bifnei beistin v'shelo bifnei beistin, doesn't matter if you're in front of court or not in front of court. Why? Because the Shevuos Pikodon has nothing to do with testimony. Only Shevuos ha'edus has to do with testimony. Mipi atzmo u'mipi achirim eino chayev ad. So it says here. Mipi atzmo u'mipi achirim. So from his own testimony and from the testimony being told to by others, eino chayev ad sheyichpor bebeistin. But if others are telling you to take the oath, it only is applicable in beistin. Now, why would you say that? That's different. That's what Rabbi said. Where does beistin come into the story? Well, the answer is that there doesn't, by the oath of Pikodon, of the security deposit, the Torah only talks about a person himself taking the oath. How do I know that a person who tells somebody else to take the oath is also liable? That is learned from Shevuos HaEdus. And by Shevuos HaEdus, by the oath of testimony, that only applies in courts. Hence, it's a don mino mina. I take this case of the oath of testimony, and I take that whole case and I put it over here into the circumstance of oath of Pikodon, of the security deposit oath, and I say that since the oath of testimony applies in court, so too, if other people are telling you to take the oath of security deposit, it only applies in Beistin. As odd as that seems.
I understand. What is an oath of testimony?
Somebody says, oath of testimony, somebody says, I'm going to court, right. I need you to be a witness for me. And you say, I swear I don't have any testimony to give. That's an oath of testimony. So oath of Pikodon is, I say, I lent you my car. And you say, what car? I swear I don't have a car. And I swear you never gave me a car. That's Shevuos Pikodon.
You mentioned security deposit. To me, security deposit is, I'm going to lend you my lawnmower. You give me $100, and when you return the lawnmower, I'll give you your $100 back.
Usually, in halachic terms, it usually goes the reverse, right? What happens is you'll say, I need to borrow $1,000, right? And I will say, great. Let me have you hold on to your watch as a security deposit, and then when you repay me the $1,000, I'll give you your watch back.
If you lose the money,
that's how a Pikodon will work generally, right?
If you lose your money,
so now you'll come back and you'll say, okay, here's your $1,000 back. Can I have my watch back? And I'll say, what watch? Right? Then I'll have. That's where my.
We do those things.
That's the Shevuos. That's the Shevuos Pikodon. Look, people forget, and some people are not nice. But we have these rules, right? Okay, so now the Chachamim say. Doesn't matter how the loan is originated, whether it's from yourself or from others. It doesn't. Once he has denied it, he's liable. So the question is, what's the source? Where are the Rabbanan getting that somebody else can make you take an oath of a Pikodon? The Torah only talks about a person taking an oath of Pikodon, of security deposit, of when a person takes his own oath. So the answer is, Lav de Gamri le me edus. Aren't we taking that source from the oath of testimony? Ushma mina, and you see clearly, bedon mina mina pligi. They're arguing about how you treat that oath. When the circumstance is reversed, the Rabbanan are saying that since by Shevuos HaEdus it only applies in court, so too when it comes to Shevuos Pikodon, others adjuring you are also going to only apply in court, whereas the Rabbi Meir is going to say, no, you're going to look at the destination results, and just like when a person swears by himself by Shevuos Pikodon, it doesn't matter if it's in court or not, so too when others make you take an oath, it doesn't matter in court or not. So the answer is, Rav Papa's answer is, you're right, me'ahi in. You're right. From that source, you can see that there is an argument between whether the Chachamim and Rabbi Meir hold don mina mina or don mina moki basra, right? However, meha leka lamashma mina. I'm just pointing out Rav Papa saying that from our Mishnah you can't prove it. There in our Mishnah, there's a completely different explanation, potential of the Kal V'chomer. Now, it could be that your explanation works, but my explanation also works. So therefore, your explanation is correct, and it's for sure proven in the other Mishnah. I'm just pointing out that in our Mishnah, it doesn't prove it. Okay, so that is that's the end of that technical, and you can see why I didn't want to do that at 2 a.m. Okay, so.
Thank you for that.
Hard enough at 9. So, the chayavin al zodon hashvua. Then the next thing is they are liable. Right? If we had discussed, you're liable in a circumstance where the person is aware that he is testifying falsely, right? He knows that he was told to testify, and he says, I don't know testimony, and he knows he's going to be liable for a korban. And that shocked Brian, if you remember, right? What are you talking about? Chayav a korban when you know you're doing it on purpose? Minan immediately, where do we know this from? The Tanna Rabbanan rabbis learned, Bekulon namar bahen v'nelam. Whenever it talks about other obligations of this korban olav yored, you have to have some hidden factor. You forgot. Somehow you didn't know whether you did it, you did under forgetful circumstances. V'kan lo nemar ba v'nelam. Here, when it comes to Shevuos, it doesn't say you forgot. You know 100% well that you're lying. Nevertheless, therefore, it's coming to us that in the case of Shevuos Ha'edos, you are liable for the sacrifice, despite the fact that you're doing the Aveira on purpose. Very unusual circumstance. Val Shigagasa im Zodon Ha'edos. Then we have another circumstance where you have some kind of shogeg going on, even though the oath of testimony itself is intentional. Well, what does that mean? This we had trouble understanding and reading the Mishnah.
If you don't know it's a violation, why would it still be?
So if you don't, so that's good. If you don't know it's a violation, you're not chayiv, right? That's clear. That we had said because it's not. You think you're telling the truth. So therefore, the only circumstances where you're going to be liable is you must know you're lying. That's number one. And then this new case, which is a little bit weird, where you know you're lying, but you're shogeg in something. So what is that? What are you shogeg in? So Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav. Rabbi Yehuda said Rav. I know I'm lying. I know what I'm saying is false and it's not right. But what I didn't know is I didn't know that I'm going to have to bring a sacrifice. Even though you didn't know you didn't bring a sacrifice, you have to bring a sacrifice. Okay, that's what this is. Then this is Yehuda, your last point. You're not liable in a circumstance where the shogeg, where it's the lowly negligence, meaning when you are completely unaware of the testimony that you're giving is false. You think you have no testimony, but you do. So you swore falsely. That's where you're not liable. Lema tanina liderav kahana uderav asi. So why don't we have an answer then? If you go back to remember this discussion that happened one night in the base medrash between Rav Kahana and Rav Asi, each of them took an oath saying, I heard Rav say it this way. And the other one said, I heard Rav say it this way. And then they were arguing. And then Rav said, like one of them. And so the other one said, uh-oh, that means I swore falsely. And Rav said, no, you didn't, because you thought you were right at the time, so therefore you're not liable. Well, why is it that they couldn't learn from this Mishnah? This Mishnah seems very clear that if you don't know that what you're saying is what you think you're saying the truth, you're not liable. So the answer is, can't learn it from there because Afagav Ditznan, even though it is listed in the Mishnah, I still needed Rav to tell that story of Rav, because Salka Daita Chamina would have thought to have said, Hachahu deloksiv v'nelam deba'inan shogeg dumya demezid. We would have thought this rule of being off from a sacrifice only applies in this case of the Shevuos Ha'edos. Why? Because you're liable a sacrifice even if you do it on purpose. So therefore, if it's anything less than knowing, then what circumstances you're not liable? Obviously, a circumstance where you don't know. So therefore, V'hasam, but there they were arguing over a Shevuos bitui, essentially, right? They were arguing in a different type of oath. This was an oath of utterance. And there it says that you're liable for a sacrifice when you don't know. And they were saying, oh no, I didn't know when I swore, so then maybe my sacrifice does apply. So therefore, afilu shigagasa, koldu, I might think I'm liable for any type of a shogeg circumstance. The answer is kamash malan. So Rav told him, no, that's not true. It has to be a circumstance where you're not liable in a circumstance where you thought factually you had reason to believe that you're telling the truth. If you thought you were telling the truth, then you're not liable for the sacrifice. Okay, new Mishnah. Shevuos Ha'edos ketzad. How does the oath of testimony work? Right, we have talked about the circumstances under which you're liable when you're not. How does it go? Amar lishnayim, he says to two people, Bo v'heiduni. So come and give testimony for me. right? This is him adjuring others. That's the circumstance. Shevuos she'ein anu yodim lecha edus. And they say, we swear that we don't know any testimony for you. O she'amru lo, or they say to him, ein anu yodim lecha edus. Or if they say, right, I'm sorry, that's the circumstance where they swear on their own. This is the circumstance he says, if they say to him, they say, we don't know any testimony, and he says, mashbia ani aleichem, I'm making you swear to it, va'amru amen, and they say amen. Actually, amen means then you are liable. Harei elu chayavim. Okay? Hishbia aleihem, now these are servants. Let's say a person says, Hishbia aleim chamesh pa'amim chutz lebeistin. Let's say the person, makes him take an oath 5 times outside of court. Ubo lebeistin, and then he comes into court, v'hodu, and he says, okay, I do no testimony. P'turin, you're not liable.
What's the reason they're not liable?
Because the outside Beis Din is not a testimony. So therefore, if you did it outside of Beis Din, now we're going to ask, because we did just mention that if you were testifying it on your own, you would be liable.
Even if you swore?
Right?
Even if you swore?
So that's that. According to this Mishnah, we're going to say that again. That contradicts what we said in the last Mishnah. The last Mishnah said that if you do testify, that if you testify yourself outside, Rabbi Meir and the Chacham said you are going to be liable. So we're going to have to. Well, that was machlokas between Rabbi Meir and the Chacham. So we'll have to see how that works out. Okay, so they come to Beis Din and he admits it, P'tur, and then you're not liable. Kafru. If he does, however, at that point, say, I don't know any testimony, then chayav and kol achas v'achas, then he's liable for each one of the oaths he took outside of court. Right? Because he took 5 oaths outside of court. So now that he says, no, I don't know anything. Now, retroactively, the 5 oaths that he took out of court are real 5 oaths. Okay. Hishbia leim hei pa'amim b'fnei Beis Din, right? If he makes him take an oath in front of Beis Din 5 times, v'kafru, then he says, I don't know anything. Einan chayavin ela achas. He's only liable once. And we're going to see, the Gemara is going to discuss why that is. Reb Shimon, Reb Shimon says, Matam, what's the reason for that? Hoveinam yecholim lachzor lahodos. Because we have a rule that once you give testimony in court, you cannot change your testimony. So once you swore in the first place that you don't know it, you can't change your mind. So the fact that they come back and say, no, do you really swear? Yes. No, do you really swear? You have to.
Even chutz Beis Din?
No, this is in Beis Din. Once you've already sworn inside Beis Din, then the court case is done, right? They're not going to bring you back outside of Beis Din again, right? That's not relevant, right? You're only liable one time because you can't change your testimony. Kafru shneim ke'echad, if the 2 of them have denounced their oath all at the same time, shneim chayavin, so then both witnesses, right? If both witnesses say, we don't know testimony, then they're both going to be liable. Bazeh achar zeh, if one guy denies it and then the other guy denies it, Harishon chayav hashini pater, only the first guy is liable. Why? Because the second guy is just one witness. So if he's only one witness, so then he can't hold the guy responsible for money. Okay, we can make sure we get that started again. Kafar echad v'hoda echad. Let's say one of them, he denies it and the other guy admits it. Hakofer chayav. Then the one who denied it is liable, right? Because if he would have admitted the testimony, he would have had 2 witnesses. Hayushtei kitei edim. Okay, let's say there are 2 sets of witnesses now. Okay, so you just could have either set of witnesses. Kafra harishona, if the first set of witnesses now backs out, the achar kach. Well, now remember the first set of witnesses shouldn't be liable because even after they back out, the second set of witnesses can still take their place and hold them responsible. First set of witnesses hasn't caused any problems. The achar kach kafra shnia. Then the second one backs out. Shteyan chayavos. They're both liable, even though that's surprising. Why? Because the testimony can be effective by both sets of witnesses. Now wait till we'll have the Gemara to discuss it. Says the Gemara, Amar Shmuel. Shmuel says, okay, Ra'u sheratz achareim. Let's say these witnesses see, and here comes this guy, he's running after them, and they go, oh no, he wants us to testify. So they take off running.
None of the claimants.
Claimants. Okay, claimants. Okay, so the guy's running after him, right? And they don't want to testify. So they start running away. Amrulo, they say to him, what are you running after us for? We swear that we don't know any testimony. P'turin, they are exempt. That's not considered an oath.
If they're not swearing any testimony, why are they running away?
Sorry?
Why are they running away if they're not? If they're innocent?
Well, there's no innocence or guilty. They just say they don't know testimony, right? They just don't know. And they're running away because maybe they just don't want this oath. They don't want to take an oath. They don't want to be involved in this. Ad sheyishmu mipiv. They're not considered to be swearing the false oath of testimony until one of the claimants tells them, I need you to swear, I need you to come to court. So since he's running to chase them and he hasn't caught them yet, the fact that they turn around and yell, what are you running after us? We swear we don't know it. That's a meaningless statement. It's not a Shevuos Eidus. My kamash malon, what's the big deal of that statement? Tanina, we learned that in a Mishnah. Shilach biyad avdo. Mishnah says later on, right? If the person sends a slave in order to be able to deliver the message, Oshamar lehan hanitba, or the one who is being the defendant, the one who's being sought after, right? He says, Mashpi ani alechem, I'm making you take an oath. She'im atem yodim lo edos shetavau v'te'iduhu. I want you guys to testify for him. If you guys know what testimony, go testify for him. But he's not the guy who's they're testifying on their behalf. Okay? Hare elu pturim. That if they swear under those circumstances, they're not liable. Why? Because you're only liable if your denial hurts the guy that is making you take the oath. If you're going to tell this to a slave, or you're going to tell this to somebody or somebody's being a do-gooder and telling people to swear on their behalf, that does not matter. Ad sheyishmeu mipiha toveya. You have to hear it from the person who is the one who's seeking the money, the one who is going to get the money. He has to be able to mention it. Ratz achareihem. Then it says, what's he's running after them? So ratz achareihem is tzrichalei. So obviously, if he's chasing after them, they haven't heard him say anything. So obviously, if the Mishnah says you have to hear it from the guy, in that circumstance, he didn't hear it from the guy. So therefore, of course, they're not liable for the oath if they turn around and yell it. No. Salka daita chamina. I would have thought to say, Kevin de ratz achareihem. Once this guy is chasing after him, keman de amar luhudami. It's like he's saying, please come testify. I mean, why is he chasing him? Because he wants to testify. So that's enough. He doesn't have to speak it out in words. Just that he's chasing after him is enough. Kamash malon. So therefore, this comes to tell us not true. Not true. So v'ha nami tanina. So this we also learned in a Mishnah. So why do we have to say it? Shevuos ha'edus ketzad. What is the circumstance? Our Mishnah. What is the circumstance of the oath of testimony? Ketzad. How does it work? Amrar le'edim bo v'heiduni shvua. Right. Come and testify for me. Right. And he says, and they take an oath. I don't know testimony. So it says very clearly. Right. Amar in, lo amar lo. The way that it works, says the Mishnah, is the guy says, you know testimony for me, come and testify, and the guy says no. Then, so the answer is Amar lav dafka. That Mishnah isn't really telling you the rule is that it has to be that somebody's inviting you to court, right? De'ilo temachi, because if you don't say that, gabi pikadon, look at the Mishnah later on that talks about the oath of securities. An oath of securities doesn't require somebody to ask you to swear the oath. Tikatanis, it says, Shevuos hapikodon ketzad. How does the oath of the securities work? Amar lo, it says to him, Tainli pikodon sheyeshli biyadcha, right? Give me the security item that I have in your hand. So hachinami, amar in lo amar lo. You can also say that it requires that the person makes the demand. If the person just up and by himself says, I don't owe anything to you, that's not enough. So but look, the pasuk literally says v'chichesh b'miso kol duhu, right? He contradicts. He declares that he doesn't know something in any circumstance. It doesn't have to be in a court. It doesn't have to be by demand.
There'll be a lie.
So therefore, Ella Amar lav dafka. So therefore, when the Mishnah says the word he said, right, doesn't mean that literally that the person who's seeking the money has to actually say it. You can't prove that from the Mishnah. So Achanami, so here also, in our Mishnah, Lav Dafka, it's not necessarily the case that he had to say it. Therefore, this statement that we made, which is that he does have to say it, is necessary. Hi, Mai. So, 1 second, let's take a look. How are you understanding this? Iyamart bishlama amar dahacha davka. So if you're going to say that, in our case, in our Mishnah, it says he said. Well, now, as a result of what you're saying, that literally it's true. By Shevuos Eidus, by the oath of testimony, the person who is going to court really does have to request the witnesses to say it, right? Mm-hmm. That's what you just said. He's chasing after him is not enough. He actually has to say it. So therefore, Tanahasam atuhacha. So now, the Mishnah over there, why does it use the word Amar? The answer is, to be even. Mishnayos use language that's easy to memorize. So despite the fact that when it comes to Shevuos Pikadon, the word he said to him, swear about the Pikadon, is not really the law, because even if he doesn't demand if the person who's seeking the object back doesn't demand it, he can still swear and be liable. It uses the same language as it does here, where it does really have to be, because that's consistent language. Ella, however, Iyamart lo amar dahasam davka, if you're going to say that over there, Velo Amar Dehacha Davka. So he says, well, what are you going to say? That over there, specifically, the Lo Amar, that Amar over there is not, right? You're going to say the Lo Amar, you're going to start over there and say that one is not, doesn't mean that it needs to have somebody specified. But here it does. So Amar Lamali Lemisniyai. So leave out the whole thing. Just don't mention it at all, right? One time it's going to be confusing. Just don't mention it at all. So therefore, the fact that it uses Amar in both cases, it makes more sense to say that the Amar in both cases, at least to say that in one case it's necessary, that's why it's used. If it's not necessary in both cases, then why use it at all? Just complicates things. So the answer is Dilma Orcha de Milsa Kamash Malon. The answer is no, it's not really. Amar doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be said in both cases. It doesn't prove anything. The reason why is that's just the normal way for things. When somebody needs somebody to go to court, we say the person is going to go find his witnesses and say, come testify. That's the normal way of things. Tanya Kavasi de Shmuel. There's a brisa that supports Shmuel. Ra'u sheba achareha. So therefore, that's why Shmuel makes the statement. The person has to tell the person, because that when it comes to Shevuos Eidos, it is necessary. Just can't learn it from the Mishnah. That's the point we're trying to make. We cannot learn it from the Mishnah. So we have a brisa that supports Shmuel that says, Ra'u sheba achareha. The person sees that the person is chasing after him. Amru lo, they said to him, Ma'ata ba'acharenu, why are you chasing after us? Shvua she'in anu yodim l'cha edus. We take an oath that we don't know any testimony for you. P'turin, they're exempt because, again, the person chasing him never got to say, I need you to testify. Ve'im pikadon, but if that same circumstance happened in a case of pikadon, of the shvua of security, then their oath would be valid. Because you don't actually have to have the person seeking his security deposit back actually tell them and ask them for it. That's another distinction between the shvua for testimony and the shvua for the pikadon for the security deposit. Okay, next. Hishpia aleim chamisha pam. If he takes the oath 5 times, right, and then he comes to court one time and says, I don't know any testimony, he's now liable for the 5 oaths outside of court. Minolan de'achbere beistinhu de mechayvi, achutz lebeistin lo mechayvi. How do I know that once he denies it in beistin, they become liable, but if he denies it outside of beistin, he's not liable, right? So Rabbi says, Amar Kra, because the pasuk says, Im lo yagid, if you don't give your testimony, v'nasa avono, then you will transgress. Lo amarti lecha, so therefore this transgression only applies el b'makom she'ilu magid, that in a location that if you would have told the truth, zeh mischayev zeh mamon, you would have caused somebody to be obligated to pay money. Okay, so therefore, if the denial occurs outside of court, it's not a denial, right? So you can be liable for the oaths outside of court, but until you deny it in court, those oaths do not become activated. Amar of Papa Abaye. So if Papa said to Abaye, Ihachi, if that's true, Ema shvua gufa bebased in v'shelo bebased in lo. If what you're saying is that from the pasuk that it says that you're only liable in the court where you can wind up exacting money from somebody, then why isn't it also true that you're only liable for the oath itself if you take it in court? Why is it that this guy took 5 oaths outside of court, he's liable, and then he denies it inside court, then he becomes liable? Why should he not be liable until he makes all of his oaths inside court?
Wouldn't that cause a contradiction?
In what sense?
Because you're saying, you say you're liable, you say you're not liable outside court, then you go into court and say you're liable.
This case is that he's swearing outside of court that he doesn't know the testimony, and then he's consistent inside court says I don't know testimony. But we're saying that if you don't make that statement in court, then your statement outside of courts are irrelevant because you're not causing any financial change outside of courts.
Even in front of the Adam, basically. Because
you're not in front of a court. Right. Witnesses don't make any difference outside of courts. Witnesses are only effective inside of courts. So the answer is lo salka daitach. Don't think that way. That an oath has to be in court as well. Titania, because we learned in a brisa. La'achas lechayev. So it says la'achas. The pasuk says that if a person will be guilty to one of these oaths, and he will v'hisvada asher chatan. He makes a vidui, a confession that he made this, then he's going to bring he's going to bring a sacrifice. So, l'chayev al kol achas v'achas. The reason why the pasuk uses he does one is to tell me you are liable for every single one of those oaths that he took, including the ones outside of court. Now, if you're going to tell me he took these oaths, how could he be liable? How could he be liable for more than one oath if oaths are only liable in court? Because the Beis Din mimechayev in court, if he took multiple oaths, you wouldn't be liable. Remember, the Mishnah said, right? Al kol achas, right? Mimechayev al kol achas v'achas. Would you be liable for every single one? V'atznan, we learned in the Mishnah, hishbi alei and chamisha pamim. If he made the person take the oath 5 times, bifnei Beis Din, in front of the court, the kafru, and he denied it 5 times in Beis Din, ein chayav in alachas, you're only liable once. Right? And Amar Rabbi Shimon, and then the Mishnah said, what? Rabbi Shimon said, matam. What was the reason behind that? Because you can't change your testimony once you're in court. So therefore, what's the circumstance by which you can be liable multiple korbanos for the same denial? It has to be that the oath outside of Beis Din is valid, and the denial in Beis Din activates the oath outside of Beis Din. But the denial has to be in Beis Din in order to activate the oaths that took place outside of Beis Din.
But don't we see here that when you make an oath, it should be invalid outside Beis Din? Why is it shown that?
So we're just decided that no, because the pasuk says that there is a circumstance where you can be liable for more than one oath. And if oaths were only liable in Beis Din, there would be no circumstance for you to be liable more than one oath, because as soon as you say an oath in Beis Din, you're finished. You can't ever repeat the same oath again because you can't change your mind. Okay, then we had some circumstances. If both of the witnesses, right, are denying at once, then they're liable. Why? Because since they're both denying at the same time, so then they're equally responsible for the person losing the money, right? But if one denies it first, then he's liable. The second one denies it is not, because one witness wouldn't be able to create the responsibility to pay. So ha'ef charlatantim. How are 2 witnesses denying it at the exact same time? We have a principle in law that says no 2 things can be exactly happening at the same time. Right? It's impossible that, right, if you zoom in fine enough, 2 things don't exactly happen at the exact same moment. That's never possible. So therefore, one is always first, and then there's always a second one, which means you should figure out whoever is the first one, that is the one that's liable. So Rav Chisda says, Hamani, Rabbi Yossi Aglili. This is Rabbi Yossi Aglili, Damer F. Shalotan. Rabbi Yossi Aglili is of the opinion, says, no, it's possible. You can have 2 things happen exactly at the same time. It's possible. So that's Rabbi Yossi's opinion. Rabbi Yochanan says, no, afilu tim rabbanim. It doesn't have to be Rabbi Yossi's opinion. It can be even Rabbanan. Kigon shekafru shneihen bebeit betoch kedei dibur. The answer is they both made their denial within the span of speech of the amount of time it takes to say, Shalom Alecha Rebbe, in courts, right? A person say, hello, my rabbi, right? A little short amount of time. And that's considered to be simultaneous. One and then the other. If you say one thing in the amount of span of time as something else, it's as though you are saying it simultaneously. Amarle Rav Achami Difti the Ravina. So Rav Achami from Difti said to Ravina, Mechti, one second, let's take a look at this. Toch kedei dibor kamahavi. What is the amount of time now? They don't understand what this means. First of all, they say, what's the amount of time it takes to be toch kedei dibor? Kedei she'ilas tam l'rav. The amount of time it takes to ask your Rebbe, how are you? Right? And ad ika shvua she'ein anu yodin l'cha edos tuvahavi. Well, count it up. Shalom alecha Rebbe. How long is that? Shalom alecha Rebbe. 2 seconds? Okay. Now, how much time does it take for a person to say, shvua she'ein anu yodin l'cha edos? That's longer.
15 to 20 seconds.
Okay. So that's longer. So then how can you have them both make their statement, toch kedei dibor, if it takes longer just for the one of them to testify? So the answer is, Amar le, kol echad ve'echad toch diburo shel chavero. I don't mean that you have to say both statements, toch kedei dibor, but you have to make both of those statements within 2 seconds. I mean that you have to be able to have the second person begin to make his oath within 2 seconds of the completion of the previous person's oath. Then it's considered to be all one statement. Okay, next. Bezal charzeh, if one goes after the other one, so then harishon chayav hasheni patur, the first one is liable for the oath, and the second one is not. Masnis and deloki haitana. The Mishnah does not follow this opinion. The Tanya learner brisa. Mashpia 8 echad. If one witness takes the testimony, patur, he's exempt. For Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Shimon says, you are still liable. Why? Because we're going to learn that there's a position called davar hagorem lemamon kemamon dami. Something that causes money is considered to be like money. When it comes to testimony, when 2 people testify that this person owes $100, so then Beis Din pronounces that he owes him $100, that is a financial obligation. this is saying that even though only one witness comes to court, what happens when one witness comes to court? When one witness comes to court, the other fellow has to swear that it's not true. Well, he's not going to want to swear that it's not true. As a result, he's going to pay. So the witness is not causing the payment, but the witness is causing the person to not take the oath, which that causes the payment. So therefore, davar hagorm, this is something that causes money to be lost, that's going to still hold you accountable for this oath. So lema beha kamifligi. This is what they're arguing about. Mar savar 8 echad ki asa l'shvua hu dika asa. One person says, when it comes to an oath, when one person comes to court, so then all he's doing is requiring you to take an oath. That has no actual financial value to your statement. And Umar Savar 8 echad ki asa lemamona ka asa. The other opinion says, no, when one opinion comes, he's coming to obligate the person to pay money. Right? So it seems like at this point the presumption is that even one witness is going to actually hold him liable to pay. We're not even talking about an oath, right? So vitisbera, how could you say one witness is going to obligate him to pay? Ha'amar Abaye says, Hakol modim be'ed sota, Hakol modim be'ede sota. Everyone agrees, in the case this interesting sota comes in this week's parsha, so it's good knowledge of parsha, right? Everyone agrees by a single witness by sota. V'akol modim be'edei sota. Everyone agrees by the case of the two witnesses by sota. Umachlokes be'edei sota. And then there's an argument when it comes to the two witnesses of sota. Hakol modim, and what are we talking about? Right? That was the statement. It's a fancy statement, but let's break it down. First, hakol modim be'ed echad. You know what? Everybody agrees by one witness. So then the next one is everyone agrees by one witness. Hakol modim be'ed shekenegdo chashud al shvua. And everyone agrees to the case of one witness in which the person who would have to take the oath is not able to take an oath because they are suspected of being liars. So all of these are cases. So that last case. So what we say here is everyone agrees about, we're going to talk about the sota in a minute, but the point that we're trying to bring is everyone agrees about one witness. That is, that everyone agrees one witness can't obligate you to pay. So therefore, Ella dekuliyem alma 8 echad ki asi l'shvua kasi. No one thinks that one witness is going to call us the payment. Everyone agrees that when one witness comes to court, it's going to be an oath. The argument here is Marsavar davar hagorim l'mamon k'mamon dami. One holds that the oath causes the money to be transferred. So therefore, if you are the one witness who causes the oath, you're causing the money. Therefore, if you deny and don't come to court, be that one witness, you're causing the loss, hence the violation of the Shevuos ha'edus, the oath of testimony. Omar Savar, the other one says, Lav k'mamon dami. Nope, not true. It's not. That's not considered to be like money. That's just an oath, not related.
Why would you show up in court to begin with if you're not innocent?
We're talking about the witness doesn't want to show up in court.
Right. If the witness doesn't show up in court,
the witnesses are always innocent.
Is the court adjourned or?
Yes. No witnesses show up. Court's adjourned. Can't solve a case without a witness. Okay, let's go back over this kind of interesting statement that we made about sota, eid sota, and it's good because the parsha is this parsha. Gufa. Let's talk about this. Amar Abaye says, Hakol modim be'ed sota. Everyone agrees by one witness when it comes to sota. V'akol modim be'edei sota. Everyone agrees by the two witnesses by sota. Machlokas be'edei sota. And there's an argument when it comes to two witnesses of sota. So, and then, Hakol modim be'ed echad. Everyone agrees about the one witness, like we just said. V'akol modim be'ed shekenegdo chashud al shvua. And everyone agrees about one witness where the circumstance is that the person who's on the other side can't take an oath. Here, let's talk about that last case first, because we may have mentioned.
So where's the disagreement with the second witness?
Hang on, we're getting there. Okay. First of all, we had an agreement that everyone agrees that one witness obligates the oath, right? Then we said, okay, so here's what happens in the circumstance of the oath, right? One witness comes to court and says, you owe $100. The guy says, no, I don't. So Beis Din says that you have to take an oath and then you don't pay. What happens if you have a guy who is known to be a liar? So the witness comes to court and says, you owe him $100. The guy says, great, I'll swear. The court says, no, we don't want you to swear because you are a liar. So we're not letting you swear. So what happens if you don't swear? Then everyone agrees that the other person on the other side swears and collects the money. Okay? You don't let a liar take the oath. right? Normally the person swears and doesn't pay. But in the case where the person who doesn't pay is a liar, then the other side does swear. Okay, so that's what we know. Let's talk about the Eid Sota. Hakol Modin be'Eid Sota. Everyone agrees when it comes to the single witness by Sota. Shechayev. Everyone agrees that in that circumstance, with one witness, so that is going to be, you're going to be liable. Okay? Where did I go? Eid Sota. So what's that talking about? Be'ed Tuma. This is talking about a witness to the actual znus act. Okay, so if you have one witness, so let's say a husband, the way that sota works is a husband tells his wife, "I don't like how you're hanging around with so and so. I want you not to hang around with him anymore." And there are witnesses that are present to that, and then she goes and hangs around with so and so again. And she is in a private location, and there are witnesses to that, or either one witness or two witnesses, depends. You have to see the argument in Masechah Sota, whether you need one witness or two witnesses to which part of that. Okay? Now, if there's one witness, then we don't know what happened in private. But what happens if we do know what happened in private? If there's two witnesses that say they committed adultery, so they're going to get killed. We know that's a punishment of chenek. Okay? What if there's only one witness? So one witness is not enough to kill somebody. However, it is enough to say you don't need to go through the sota process. And she's going to be, right, then she's going to be considered to be an adulteress, and he doesn't have to pay the ksuba. So she gets divorced with no ksuba. Derachmana heimena dichsiv, because the pasuk says the Torah gave belief to this one witness. Normally say he's only one witness, so that's not enough. But the Torah gave him enough belief to make the divorce without the ksuba. As the pasuk said, the aid ain ba. If there is no witness, when does sota gets activated? When there's no witness to what occurred in private. Kol sheyesh ba. However, if there is a circumstance where we know what happened in private, even with one witness, that would be sufficient to cancel the whole sota process, and she gets divorced with no ksuba.
If she had relationships without a witness, then she's...
Without a witness, then they go through the sota process. Okay? That's case number one. That's the single witness. Everyone agrees by the single witness of sota. Let's stop here.
Okay.
Hakomodim, right?
Yes.
Hakomodim.
Kol modin be'edei sota.